I just want to say that Bob and I were talking this morning, and I was thinking about this building, and it was shortly after we started our church in June of 2014 that this building was available, and we thought that seemed insane, and then it came up again in September of 2014 to get this, and I always remember Nate Cavender was like so in favor of getting it, and I always remember he kept saying, "I've been praying for this like for the last 3 months." And and I remember even we were talking. I think at the time, it was gonna like we were taking in somewhere like right around $1,600 a week, and which I think most people would be really excited about. Like 3 months into starting a church. But if you started a church from scratch like we did, and it was going to be like $1,000 just for to pay for the mortgage in this place. And we were like, oh, we could do that. We have $1,600. And then just, we started thinking like, well, we got to pay electricity and, water and all that stuff and heat. And, but we did it. And it really blossomed. So at that time in early 2014, I was looking to go back to New York and help start churches. And a man who was advising me told me that I should go be a part of a smaller church or a new church to see if I even would like that if I was going to go start churches. So I actually at the time thought about going to South Point. It was about 2 years old, and Bob, in fact, had started it. And I called Bob up, and just because he was a mentor of mine, and I was asking him what he thought about that idea, and he told me that was a horrible idea, and that we should start Christway. So I guess technically Bob was the one who invited me, and so I just said okay, and we started. So praise God for it. I do need Adam. I need you to come on up here. I need Adam to come up here. And come on, hurry up. You hustle. And look, you had one job to do was to take that down. You didn't take it, so go sit down now. And one job. And so, all right. If you would turn to Hebrews 12:25, where he's like the only person I would do that to. Don't you worry. Everyone else, I would calmly take the book and put it somewhere else. But I want to continue. We're going to start in the same passage as last week, and I want to talk a little more about when God shakes the heavens and what that means and how do we respond to that. I'll do several announcements at the end, but I think this is feedback to last week's sermon was in abundance, so I figured it struck a chord with people, and the Bible truth and revelation of that truth does shake some people. It emboldens others. And I think there's just some people who maybe if we talk about this again, it would move you towards a spiritual victory that Jesus can bring and wants to bring. And sometimes we're scared to have him bring. When you read Hebrews 12, we're not going to read the whole thing like we did last week. The language in it is very, very strong. It's very potent. And if you're not a person filled with hope, you could read it, and it's very this like robust, somber word choices, and the imagery it sets is very sober and solemn. It talks about weights and sins that cling to us. I mean, when something clings to us, we're usually trying to get it off. There's a need for endurance. There's talking about Jesus who endured a cross, and he endured shame and humility or hostility. And it talks about how we can grow weary and we could grow faint-hearted, and how there's a struggle against sin, and there's discipline, and how we can feel weary when we're reproved, how there's painful discipline, how there could be drooping hands and weak knees, how we get out of joint, how there's a root of bitterness that troubles and defiles, how there's rejection and there's no chance to repent. There's the picture of Sinai that was a picture of God fulfilling his promise, but for some people, it was this blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a storm and a trumpet blast and a voice that made hearers beg that nothing else be said by that voice. All right, it was trembling with fear. It was, as Hebrews calls it, the shaking of the earth. And those troubles can come to people who are God's people. Right? Those were God's people at Mount Sinai, and this letter here is written to New Testament believers. But that somber view is what life is going to feel like when we do take our eyes off of Jesus who endured. And we can be assured that everyone who lives holy like Jesus is going to suffer some level of persecution. A devoted disciple of Jesus is not a human life that is filled with constant pleasure and filled with continual honor. And we are living in this arena where there's this spiritual battle where God is shaking the heavens. And when you walk with God, it also, you can have victory according to Hebrews 12, right? We can resist sin. You can, right? Like you can endure hardship. You can have the ability and the power to lift the drooping hands and the weak knees and stand up straight. And we can make straight paths for our feet through the Spirit and through the Word. We can be healed of what is ailing us. We can have peace with everyone, as it says there, right? We can have the holiness that helps us see Jesus and walk with Jesus. We can incorporate and believe and live in the truth of the grace of God, like Michelle just talked about, how she knew Christ as a Savior, but that grace hadn't gotten into every part of her life and dealt with a lot of things that needed grace, right? And we can overcome bitterness and avoid defilement. We can inherit the blessing. And we can do all of that, according to Hebrews 12, because we look to Jesus, like him who is seated at the right hand of God and ruling. He's ascended up there, and he is doing the will of his Father, and he is our ruler. He calls us his children. We can do all that because he has love that he proves to us by not letting us go astray. We can know that we can have victory in those things because the Spirit is at work in us to make us holy like Jesus, and we see, hopefully, the fruits of righteousness and peace and love and joy, etc., that are being built in us because of Christ. And, because instead of gloom, we can look to this eternal home that we have, a heavenly city with the innumerable angels in praise and the saints praising there too. And because we can do that because Jesus is the mediator and he's the guarantee of the new covenant from God. He's the one whose blood was shed for the promise of eternal life. And then Hebrews 12:25 says this, see that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. Right? He very clear. Don't refuse Jesus. Don't refuse how he is speaking to you. The warning is coming from heaven. The letter is about how God has spoken and is speaking to us through Christ. I want to show you on the screen, you don't have to turn there, the first two verses in Hebrews. It says this. It says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. When you think about, like, what is God saying to me? Just think about Jesus. Just think about Jesus who he gave, and Jesus who was a sacrifice, and Jesus who sits and makes intercession for you, and who is ruling and who has given you his Spirit to empower you. That's what God is saying. Right? And after 12 chapters of presenting the worthiness of Jesus, the writer of Hebrews says, don't refuse Jesus who is speaking to us from heaven. He's warning us. Jesus is how God speaks. Right? And then he continues in Hebrews 12:26. He says, at that time, his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, yet once more, I'll shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. And this phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken. That is, things that have been made in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. He is shaking things in heaven and earth to remove what won't remain and is not eternal. It's part of your discipline, right? It is part of the training up and building up that God will remove things that he doesn't want you to have, or because they are hurting your eternity, right? They are hurting what you could do for eternity. They are hurting the building of his kingdom. And now he doesn't just shake the mountains, as it says there, he shakes the heavens too. So the question is, if Sinai, they literally had a mountain that was shaking, right? Shaking the earth. What does it mean to shake the heavens? Like, what does that mean? Well, the heavens in the Bible is not where you go when you die. In fact, I think it'd be hard-pressed, nearly impossible to find a place where it says that heaven is where you go when you die. Now, we use that terminology, right? We use that terminology, but that's not, the Bible doesn't use that. And the heavens are the place, the realm of what is invisible to the eye, right? It's where the principalities and powers and angels and demons dwell, right? The culture the Bible is written to over the many, many centuries and even thousands of years, they called it the heavens as though like that's where the unseen beings came from, right? Like they were like lowly earth people, and from somewhere up there, like see that star, that must be like a god, right? Like, like the things that were unseen came from the heavens. And the unseen realm is intertwined with ours, right? Because we are influenced by it. We are bound to it in some unfortunate ways. We have our souls tied to things that are from that realm. And the unseen realm is the heavens. And we were meant, from the very beginning, you go back to Genesis, we were meant to rule it. But not to allow it to rule us. But we have allowed, right? We have allowed that. We have allowed a lot of the things that God, that are spiritual, to rule us when that was never God's intention. And so you say, well, what happens when God shakes the heavens and when the spiritual realm is shaken? Like what is that talking about? Right? And so, fortunately, there are plenty of examples in the Bible and in the Gospels where we're going to look at it. We're going to look at two of them. Okay, they're going to come up on the screen. You can turn there if you want, but I want you to consider these verses in Luke 4. The Bible says this. In the synagogue, there was a man, who had the spirit of an unclean demon. And he cried out with a loud voice, "Ha! What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And when the demon had thrown him down in their midst, he came out of him, having done him no harm. Okay, this is the first demonic healing recorded in Luke. Now, this story is a little bit like, let me explain. Growing up, I know some people will argue with this. My favorite superhero was Batman. I know some people are going to say he's not a superhero, but he was a superhero, okay? And so, he didn't have any superpowers, but I always loved Batman. And in my lifetime, there was we watched the reruns of that campy, goofy TV show from the 60s, and there was all sorts of cartoons, and there have been different movie lives of it. Okay. In every Batman origin story, there's this point where young Batman puts on his bat outfit, and he's going to step himself into a situation where a crime's about to happen. Maybe it's a gang is going to beat someone up or something like that, and all of a sudden he shows up, and they're like, "Who are you, freak?" And he's like, "I'm Batman." And then they start swinging at him, and Batman just takes out 12 people, throwing batarangs and smoke bombs and stuff, and beating people, and there's always that one last guy who didn't get beaten yet and looks at him and runs away, right? That is typical movie Batman story thing. Okay, this is a little bit like that, right? This is a little bit like that. Because there's this thing going on, in the unseen realm, where there's understandings that they have based on things that we understand from the Old Testament. That it's the demons, we kind of have our turf and our area, right? And so when Jesus shows up, and the demon's he's a little confused, right? I think you should read this as he's a little unnerved, what? He knows who Jesus is, the Son of God, and so he's looking at it as in the demons, to use biblical terminology, is I think they believe they have their inheritance, right? Like things that they have inherited in areas they have inherited. And so when they were in Israel, though, they kind of wandered into God's inheritance, but it seemed like that had been okay. You know how? Okay, if you're a kid in here, don't tell your parents this, but you know how your parents have rules, and then you break them, and they don't do anything about it, and you're like, I kind of push a little more, get a little further, beyond what they said you could do, but they're not stopping you, right? And I think maybe that's a little bit how this was sort of the demons had kind of, expanded some in their territory, and here they were in Israel, which was God's, right? Israel was God's territory, and the demon is wondering, why is Jesus here? And so he says to the man, have you come to destroy us? And the demon appears to know that the Son of God can do it and will do it someday. But is he going to do it now? And there are different ways you can read the demon's reaction, but any of them have the feeling of it being very uneasy and disturbed, right? It's just like, it does not like what's going on. And so Jesus rebukes the demon, and he says, be silent and come out of him. And the man is just like thrown down in their midst, right? Like he yells before that, like he's just thrown down in their midst, and the demon comes out. That is an example of Jesus shaking the heavens. It's not how he shakes the heavens every time. I'm just using it as an example, okay? When he shook the heavenly realm, what did it look like to us earthly beings who can't see the heavenly realm? Right? Remember, these stories are told with a little bit of like, the godlike narrator, who's like able to sit up in the sky and see everything that's going on, right? And knows what's going on in everyone's heart and mind and stuff like that. But if you're just a person standing there, this guy's kind of whack. And Jesus comes in, and he's just like, he's screaming, like, what are you doing here? And Jesus is like, you come out of him, and the guy's just like, poof. And they're like, what just happened? Right? I mean, like, what just happened? Like, that man who's crazy was just being crazy, and Jesus looked at him and said, you come out. What came out? What? And he just fell to the ground. Right? And if you're sitting there, that might shake you, right? Or you're looking at this guy, and you're like, this man is acting strange. And this man has been, has just like completely collapsed, right? And so that's what it looked like to human beings. It looked like a human being was yelling, and then he passed out or got thrown down or whatever it is. And we see the human reactions in this man who was demon-possessed that look like fear and anger or someone losing control, right? Now, does that mean that everyone who has fear and anger and is losing self-control is like some sort of demonically possessed person like that? No, but I think there's a lot of demonic, spiritual realm, heavenly realm, unseen realm influence in a lot of that, which we'll talk about, right? And so I'm going to show you more examples that the people who can come undone when God moves and shakes things can have those reactions of anger and yelling and fits because they're very tied to something, right? They can be very tied to something that if you want to call it demonic. I know people don't like that, but this is the word the Bible uses, right? Or evil or uneternal, right? That God is trying to shake out, like something that they have made oftentimes, and this is where it really gets to people, is that it is something that they have made the bedrock part of the foundation of their soul and psyche, right? And it's often lies and deceptions that are anchored into your logic and thinking, right? You say, how do you know that? That's what Satan did in the garden, right? Like, what did Satan do in the garden? He's feeding lies, and he's trying to get Eve to take that lie, incorporate it into her thinking, right? As I've said this many times, I believe that if Eve took the information that Satan wanted as true, then in her logic, she made a good decision, right? Like, she made a good decision, but it was based on a lie. You understand that, right? She thought it was so good, she should share it with her husband, right? And so he gets in there, and he just feeds this lie, and he gets it as part of the foundation. And Eve is like, well, if that is good to eat and it's good for food, then why not? It makes me wise, like God, right? And so you see that logic at work in Satan's toolbox. But man, when something like that becomes part of our foundation and God starts coming and being, that's not even true, that could shake us. Man, a couple years ago, this is more than a couple years ago, but probably like 8 years ago, one of my neighbors had a rental. Like, the house next door to me was rented out. And he was an old guy. His name was Mr. Green. And Mr. Green just did some things that were very questionable to me at times. One time, him and his friend decided that they wanted to take this tree down. They didn't think it was that big, and they lassoed a rope over as high as they could in the tree, and they were just pulling as hard as they could to like see if they could break the tree and have it come down without paying someone to cut it. And then their rope snapped, and they're both, him and his friend, both very kind of overweight, and they just went tumbling to the ground, like when they were trying to do that. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, he would just do things like that. So one day, he says to me, he's like, can you come over to my house? Come over to the house. I'm like, sure. So I went over to the house, and if you've ever been to my house, it's not like a huge house. It's kind of narrow, and so there's a basement. And so like when you walk down the basement, you have to really watch your head, because you could like smack your head on the support beams there. So Mr. Green says to me, he's like, I decided I'm looking to sell this house and I want to make it like nicer and stuff. And he's like, I've hit my head on this a couple times. He's like, what would you think if I cut a head space? I'm talking about like the support going across the basement that's holding up the upstairs. I was like, look, Mr. Green, I don't know a lot about houses and construction, but I know that those beams right there are holding up your upstairs. You should not do that. That is holding up the upstairs, right? Like, do not make headspace just duck. I mean, you just put something, put like some cushion on there or something like that. You don't want to do that, okay? And it's just a funny story that's sticks in my head because I'm like, oh man, someone actually knows less than I do about building a house, and I got to use my wisdom. But if you understand that, people who have been influenced by the heavenly realm to believe lies and have incorporated those into their foundation, they feel like how that house would have felt if you pulled out that header when God comes and starts shaking what's not eternal. Right? Like it's often lies and deceptions, that are just anchored into you. And when Jesus comes through and the Spirit's at work and he just starts shaking those things that aren't eternal, like lies, maybe that we've built our lives upon and idols, though we don't want to call them that have provided us foundation and security and comfort, we are not going quiet. Right? That's the carnal reaction to things. Some people, I'll give you for instance, right? Some people have built their whole life around the impact of their parents. They have built their whole life around the impact of abuse for their parents. They have built their whole life around the impact of hatred for their parents, or they have built their whole life around the impact of pleasing their parents. And when God kind of comes and is like, it doesn't feel like I'm on the throne. It feels like something else has your heart that is spiritual and has its claws in you, that you feel like what they think or what they did is the biggest determiner of who you are in your life, then the fact that you are God's child, that you are God's chosen, that you are God's church, that you are his beloved, that you are forgiven, that you have received and can receive rivers of living water that flow from him. God is a jealous God. Is like, I want that. I want that. You cannot give that to your mother. You cannot give that to your father. That is mine. That is God's, right? And it's just, and I know sometimes people, it's like, you can't fathom, you actually cannot fathom. Think about this. There are people who are Christians who cannot fathom the life where Jesus is actually king. Because something else is king. Right? Because you've always been ruled by something else. You're ruled by a rule that you were fed and believed and incorporated into your foundation. Can I tell you the stupidest story? It's the stupid. You're going to laugh again. You're going to laugh, okay? But this is true. When I was a kid, I won't get into specifics, but there was this type of jeans that if you wore them, the other kids said you were effeminate. And they didn't use that word, okay? And so it was like, and so, I had a pair of those jeans, and my parents weren't rich. It's not like today, most kids are just like, oh, I need a new pair of jeans, Mom. Okay, they're $90 at American Eagle. Oh, okay, here you go. Like that kind of thing, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that, children. It was like, you had these jeans. And so I had a pair of those jeans, and I knew I wasn't getting new jeans. I wasn't getting new jeans. So you know what I did? You got like that brown label in the back. I ripped that brown label off. So I wear them to school like, Matt, is that brand of jeans and that means you're effeminate? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, it's like got the dark blue thing there because you obviously ripped the patch off. I'm like, no, I didn't rip them off. And then, dang, those things on the pocket, they still got that little flap with the name on it, you know what I'm talking about? And they're like, it says it right there. That means you're effeminate, right? I'm like, all right. So, I wouldn't wear those jeans again. And, like I just wear other stuff. 3 months ago, I was buying jeans. I'm in the store. I'm looking at these jeans, like, those are nice jeans. Like, oh, it's that brand. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it because in my heart, it was just like, no. You're like, why? Why? Because when I was younger, like, something got in my head that, like, people are gonna make fun of me. People are gonna say I'm this, or you're not on the in crowd. You're not. And I'm 49 years old shopping for jeans, and it's just I can't buy those. I can't buy those, right? And you understand that story, right? But understand you do that with serious things, right? Like you do that with serious things that have shaped your life every day and every moment of how you think and how you react and how you respond to God and what really is your King and Lord. Because there are things that, man, it was important. It was important to me not to be made fun of. That was very important to me as a child, right? And that, just that alone, not wanting to be made fun of, just shaped so many things. But that's the most important thing in the world. Like, what if I had to stand up to God and I was going to be made fun of? Or for God, excuse me. What if I had to take a stand for God and I was going to be made fun of? Am I not going to take the stand for God because deep in my heart I don't want to be made fun of? Right? And we have those things like that, right? And we are ruled by rules that we were fed and believed and incorporated into our foundation. Some of them are things like this. I cannot become blank. But what if God wanted you to be that? Right? Like if the rule of your life is I cannot become blank. I must be, right? Has that ever overruled God? Right? How about this one? This is a big one. I got this one. I will never be like, and that rules you. Right? Like that is what rules you. Or, or in your life, you're like, I must have, and that becomes a rule. Right? The rule, the precept you follow has been incorporated into the foundation of your essence, your thoughts, and your life. And that is a common way the kingdom of darkness works. And God has to shake that out. Right? And when Jesus comes and shakes the heavens, when the Spirit of God moves and works to remove what is not eternal, that might shatter your foundation. And the true foundation is that we need the gospel with Jesus as King, and that He is abundantly supplying in our lives. See, there are lies that we believe. There are insecurities we have to try and protect, and those aren't kings to be put on the throne, but they are the ingredients to put in the foundation of that you have put in the foundation of what you're building. And sometimes the work God has to do isn't just surface level. It's just going deep down to the center and being like, we got to deal with it. We got to deal with your mom. You got to deal with your dad. You got to deal with your insecurities. You got to deal with what you've always thought. We have to deal with what you really always think is the most important thing in life, Matthew. We need to deal with that. That is shaking the heavenly realm kind of stuff. Because that came from the deceiver. Right? And Jesus comes to a demon-possessed man, and he just basically says, you don't have to live like that. And the man starts quaking. You know what I'm saying? Like he's just like Jesus, like, come on out of him. And the guy's just, falls. And when Jesus said that, the heavens shuddered. Spirits freak. He's come to destroy us. Right? And you and I quake when it gets really uncomfortable, because, when God starts talking about, you're built upon this very temporal truth, and we need to fix that. I want you to know something I love about this story. Verse 35 is going to come up. It says this. It says, but Jesus rebuked him, saying, be silent and come out of him. And when the demon had thrown him down in their midst, he came out of him, having done him no harm. There was no harm done to the man. Jesus isn't trying to heal you and take his brothers and sisters, the children of God, to a place of harm. Truth and renewal and the need for transforming our minds are hard. They're hard to fathom, right? It actually is hard to sometimes imagine what a life of freedom would be like. right? It's hard to imagine, like, um, if anger drives me all the time, what does that life even look like with no anger? Like, what would motivate me? What would drive me? W- Would I have to smile more? Right? It's just like, what would happen if that actually happened? And not as a joke, that's fearful to people. Right? It's fearful when you've always lived a certain way your whole life. Right? Like it's fearful to think like this is the way we've done. There's people who at South Point who voted yes for the merge, and right now they're like, I hate next Sunday. I hate because we always did it this way, and now Christ was going to do it their way. And you're like, what is that life like? Like, what is the church going to look like? Are we going to fall apart? Or, it's like all those types of things that because we just can't imagine. Like, what would happen? What would happen if there was actually like real transformation and these things upon which I built my life? Like my whole life has been built on that. Like I can't just like ignore it. But Jesus is like, no, we're going to shake that out. We're gonna cut that header. And we're going to see what happens. But there was no harm. Right? It's hard to look at ourselves and believe that for decades we've been tricked and deceived by the minions of the father of lies. Right? It's painful to be remade. It's painful to realize that the desires of your heart and the validation you always sought and the fears you avoided actually did nothing to make Jesus your king. They just helped you avoid spiritual healing. They just helped you feel like you're comfortable. They just helped you go back in a shell where Satan is very happy that you're there. Right? It takes faith to obey the Spirit working when God shakes the heavens. It's hard. It's no wonder that heaven says, that Hebrews says, lift the drooping hands and the weak knees. Let's look at another story. Look at these verses in Mark 9. Someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. And Jesus answered them, Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, If you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. What happens here? A spirit, a demon that makes people unable to talk? Right? The father reports that the son is thrown to the ground, and he foams and he grinds his teeth and he gets rigid since he was a kid. And the child would try to burn himself in fire and throw himself into the water and drown. Can you imagine being a dad of a child like that, who at any moment all of a sudden is trying to kill itself? Can you imagine it? I mean, it's enough watching toddlers sometimes, because they do stuff that's insane. Like they're not even thinking about danger and stuff like that. And you have this kid who's a little bit older, and from the time he was little has been like this, and maybe he's not talking, but maybe he seems okay, and then all of a sudden, like you're having a fire and you're trying to roast dinner or something like that, and the kid's trying to dive into it, and you're trying to just like hold him back, and he's just foaming and just the gnashing or grinding of teeth. And Jesus commands the spirit to come out of the boy and never enter him again. And what do we see? We see someone shrieking. We see someone convulsing. We see someone who everyone looks at and is like, Jesus just killed that kid. That kid's dead. Not that they're blaming Jesus, but it's just like, dead. And Jesus took him by the hand, and the boy got up. When God shakes the heavens and you respond, you're going to ask yourself this question. Then who am I? If I'm not anger, then who am I? If I'm not going to live a life where I have to have this, then what am I? That's hard. Because you've lived the rest of your life trying to be that, or trying not to be that person, or trying to never have someone make fun of you, or whatever it is. Whatever the ruling rule is in your life. Make you feel like you're dead. And that's the point. That's the point. Is that we do need to die. Right? We're all going to die physically someday. And even then, Jesus is going to resurrect us. But now, what we believe in the gospel is that now, God can recreate us into being what he wants us to be. He can turn us into the person who doesn't have to have that. The person who, as Tiffany testified before, was 12 years, I think she said. 12 years of being an addict. She had to have it, right? She had to have something. No, actually, no, she doesn't, right? She doesn't, but she believed that. Her body felt it. She had, done things to wire her body that way, and God just said, come out. Come out of there. And you come over here. And you're like, well, what am I? And Jesus grabbed Tiffany's hand and was like, first of all, you're saved. And you're my child. And you're going to be a mom and a wife. And there's a whole lot we got. And I know sometimes, we don't have dramatic stories. You don't need a dramatic story like that. Because Satan's very happy with you having a subdued story. With a very strong connection to some lie or something that he uses to control you. And Jesus comes, and you're like, what is shaking the heavens, like Revelation stuff falling from the sky? No. Shaking the heavens is God coming after the unseen realm and just saying, enough of this. Matthew, enough of this with how you've lived, how you've thought, how you've been programmed, what you need, who you will not be, who you despise, what motivates you, all of that. Come follow me. Come follow me. And we all have that. Because, man, we all believe lies. We all have stuff we're connected to. We all have stuff, that would just be the most dreadful, shameful thing if it happened. We all have the people we look at and just who have motivated us, in a negative way to not be like them. And all those things are things we're just connected to. And God looks at all those and goes, every one of those rules your life more than I do. And so you say, how do you respond? Very simple to end. The verses aren't going to come up, but Hebrews 12:28. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire. It starts with doing away with your lack of gratitude. It starts with true worship, and that doesn't mean we're singing songs in church. It means that we give to God the worth he has as a king. As it says there, acceptable worship with reverence and awe. And some of you just need to have recaptured the reverence for God. You need that. You need that to realize that he's just not like you. He's not equal to you. He's not someone who you can just flippantly cast aside. He is the God, the consuming fire, the judge, the Savior, the friend, the one who will pick you up and make you one day. I know sometimes the things he shakes are just, but I've always lived that way. There's a better way to live. There's a better way to live in Christ and in the Spirit and not being controlled by these things that are not eternal. Listen, what people have done to you is not eternal. It's not. The thing you have to have is not eternal. the fear you fear facing that drives your life, it won't be in heaven. It won't. But yet people live that way. And at some point, God comes and he shakes very loud, or as he often does in a still small voice. It's like, come on, shake that loose. Shake it loose. Let's pray. God, thank you. Your word is good. It's heavy. It's hard. I pray, God, that you would help us now as I don't know what you've done in people's hearts and lives. I know what you've spoken to me about personally with this, and I know what you've spoken to me about concerning this as a sermon. And God, I pray you do a mighty work in people's lives. I'm not going to say much of anything else except, why don't you pray? Why don't you respond to God in whatever it is he wants you to do? Why don't you stop? Why don't you confess and renounce and say, God, you know what? I confess that this rules me. Having this, not being that, not being like that person, my parents, whatever it is, those rule me. And I want to renounce that today. And I want you to be the king. Some of you need that. So I'll be quiet, but why don't you go ahead and pray?